Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio, where we like to explore, ponder, and analyze far beyond where the corporate media, or should I say the fake media, chooses to take the listening audience. Now, I'm going to deal with something about authoritarianism here. But first, I would like to encourage people, if you're listening to this later on YouTube, just click on the corner where it says click to go to official website and check out my official website, and also become a subscriber so you can keep abreast of new shows coming up. Anyway, I was in a discussion the other day with a young woman. I just told her that about my new book, The Destiny of Our Past. Here's a little plug. You can look it up. If you go type in Google Amazon, Michael Cross, Destiny of Our Past, and it'll come up. It's a science fiction book based on it's set in the era of Noah, about 12,000 years ago. And yes, it's a science fiction book. You'll just have to read the description to find out what it's about. But anyway, when I contacted her, because she likes my books, I mentioned the plot, and some of it has to deal with a dystopian type of government that would be in existence. And what was interesting was that she actually made a comment about, well, I don't know why people complain about surveillance and all these kinds of things. I don't see a problem with it. And we started talking, and then I mentioned an idea I had for a future book. And in this book, it would be based on the idea that people would be able to get these implants that would enhance their abilities, their mental abilities. It would enhance their happiness and so forth. But they don't realize that once you go to the final upgrade, that it erases your ego or your soul projection. So essentially, you're dead. Yes, you still have your memories, just like if you switch a hard drive from one computer to another. You still would interact the same way you would at work and so forth, but it would be an interface with a computer, not you. You'd be gone. And she made a comment that would be so awesome if that really could exist. And I thought she was joking, so I said, well, you do realize that a person, if they had this, would be dead, essentially. They would no longer have whatever you want to call it, your soul, your ego. You'd be kind of a walking and talking and interacting zombie, but the computer would be running your program. And she said, well, kind of like an anthill. And I said, well, yeah. And she said, well, again, I think that would be great. And again, I guess I just was like, what? She's intelligent and so forth. And so I again pressed her a little bit. And during the course of the conversation, she was totally into it. In fact, she said it would be so great that you wouldn't have anxiety and worry and all these other things, and we could save the planet. She actually said, she used the word sustainability. She said that the computer could create situations in which people would only react and behave responsibly towards each other and towards the environment. And so I said, well, would you encourage others to do this kind of thing? And she said, well, absolutely. I would enthusiastically. I'd be like a champion for this program. And, she went into, she gave me a little inspiration for what I'm going to include in that book. But essentially, she felt it was the idea of humanity being sort of an anthill existence would be really good. We don't know what kind of consciousness that insects have, but we can be pretty much assured that in an anthill, the queen would probably have a little bit higher level functioning. And of course, in this society I'd be describing, a small percentage of people would be left unchipped, and they would direct the society, eventually with the goal of reducing the population down to maybe just a few million people over time, but doing it in a nice way, because you'd be able to program people's desire to reproduce and so forth, and you'd be making their decisions ultimately through the computer network. And finally I asked her, how many people do you think would do this? And she said, I think a lot of people that have grown up with computers and so forth would see this as a logical extension of the Industrial Revolution, kind of an evolution, if you want to call it that, where before humans learned how to use tools to make machines to make life easier, then the machines will take over the humans and make life more efficient. And so this brought me to this idea that humans, I have had this idea for a long time, but humans ultimately, many, desire authority, desire to conform within a matrix. Now, they may not be willing at this point in history to go ahead and essentially just shut themselves off. But the thing is that people have this sense that it's comfortable, that maybe they as individuals don't have the ability to think as clearly as the elite. And maybe we should look at this authoritarian model and really get an idea for what it's all about so we can understand it, but also see what I think could really be a future trend in our society, in which maybe in the future, just like on Star Trek, of course they didn't interact with memory and so forth, but you had the Borg or something like that. I don't know if people would want that. I mean, it's not very attractive, is it? Kind of like walking corpses with machines stuck in them. In this way, the only machine you would have would be a microchip that would then take over the functions of your cerebral cortex and all the other sections that might have what is you, projected into what is you. So anyway, there's a lot of models of authoritarian personality that I have seen. In recent years, it's mostly been something that liberals will use to try to describe conservatives. And often I suspect that when it comes out of sociology, that the idea is that what you should do is, I don't see that there's a lot of validity when you start saying, these are the things I don't like, so then, therefore, let's make them characteristics of something that sounds bad, an authoritarian. So often, maybe you ask a question like, do you believe in religion? And the person would say, yes. And then you say, do you believe there are some moral absolutes that cannot be transgressed? And the person says, well, obviously, yes, I believe in the Ten Commandments. And all of a sudden, you are listed check mark, that you have one of the traits of an authoritarian personality. When in reality, you could argue that religion gives you a sense of being able to rebel against any kind of social structure in your society that the values from your religion would go against. However, from sociology, you generally get those kinds of descriptions. Now, of course, I prefer psychology, okay? And the traditional model for the authoritarian mind is one that's, it's rooted in psychoanalysis. And, Freud, I'm going to use Freud because that's the person most people think of when they think of psychoanalysis. Freud believed that there was 3 components of the personality. Okay, this will be easy. Don't switch off now. There was the id, which are all of our instincts. What we would do if no one was looking and we'd never been taught that that was wrong to do. Okay? That's the id. The naughty part that would come out and do all those kinds of things. Instincts, aggression, those kinds of things. And then there's the ego, which is sort of you. Okay, for no better way of saying it. Of course, it gets more complicated than that. But the ego, like if in my book, that would be the part shut off. The ego is your awareness. And then there's the superego. The superego is the part that has been taught such things as values, morality, could be based on religion, philosophy, combination of the two, but it's the part that says this is right and this is wrong. So it's that part that gives you guilt if, for instance, you've been taught that, good boys and girls don't sleep around, and then all of a sudden you find yourself seduced by someone you're not married to, and then you feel the guilt come in. It's sort of the policeman of the mind. Now, I bring this up because the original view of this personality is that some people have a weak ego that cannot actually function in the society easily. They're too prone to temptation. Okay? They're taught at church, don't look at pornography. And, they hear a sermon across the pulpit, don't look at pornography. And they just can't help themselves. Now they've got it on their mind, they go home, and it's just like, I gotta look at it. I actually read somewhere where pornography use was highest on afternoons on Sunday. So I'm wondering if there's a correlation there. It could just be that more people have time off in the afternoons on Sunday. I don't know. But the thing is that most people can just kind of resist temptation. Okay, you may want to fall for the temptation. Let's say you see a really great German chocolate cake, and you can eat the whole thing if you want to, but then you think, okay, well, I don't want that because I want my weight to stay at a certain level. I don't want to get fat. So you don't eat it. Some people, they can't resist it. I mean, it's there, it's screaming at them, and they just have to devour the whole thing. Okay? Now, those people I just described, the ones that can't stop looking at the porn or eating the chocolate cake or watching porn and eating chocolate cake at the same time, I don't know. The thing is, they're the ones who are going to be more likely to seek authoritarian answers. And you're wondering, well, why is that? Because they can't control their own impulses. Their ego's not able to keep the id under control. So the superego is powerless. So therefore, what they need to do is turn the superego into some sort of policeman, stormtrooper, whatever, who will make sure that they do the right thing. But most of the time, this is projected out on other people. If I'm weak, they must be weak. If I'm looking at porn, everyone must be looking at porn. If I'm overeating, everyone overeats. That's the authoritarian mind. It has to find order because it cannot have disorder or chaos or freedom. And the thing is that since they believe everyone's thinking the way they are, they have to then control those other people. These are the people who, and they come in all political persuasions. You have the right wing, maybe a certain segment of it, where they want to make laws to control what people see on the internet or whatever. But then you have the left wing, who maybe they're compensating for their own desires, their own beliefs. So they're quick to point out anything. Okay, the social justice warriors I'm talking about. They feel guilt. And so they just compensate for that guilt. They have to make sure that they're telling other people what to do and also accusing other people. So if someone says a joke that they don't even mean to be offensive towards a race or gender or something like that, even if the person is of that race or gender, that person will be the one who will say, we need to have laws against that. We need to have laws on our campus that will say that a student or a teacher or whatever is not allowed to use those kinds of jokes. Then, when it comes to Halloween, they start, thinking, oh my gosh, there's a guy over there who's dressed up like a what you call mariachi dancer or something or singer or something like that. And it doesn't matter that the guy actually is Hispanic in his background. It only matters that they feel bad, so therefore they project it onto other people. Okay? That is the authoritarian model, working in a more, what you would call the Freudian perspective. The thing is that, of course, parental styles can influence this. But that's mostly the fact that authoritarian parents, the ones that God said it, that settles it, or the liberal, progressive parent who uses guilt as a means to control people. Okay? So, the kid says or does something that goes against politically correct culture, and therefore mom or dad will say, you should feel really bad about that. How would that make someone feel if they were part of this other religion or race or ethnicity or gender or whatever? And, so that can be just as brutal, using the guilt as using the threat of punishment that would be more likely to come from the person that's more conservative. Okay? I would actually say that the guilt complex that would be projected onto that child is going to be more oppressive than maybe the idea that the kid gets a smack on the rear end for saying something rude to someone and is told, hey, we don't do that, that's improper, that's not nice, versus someone else who wants to say, the whole guilt of Western civilization as I see it shall be put on your shoulders now, kid. So that is a problem, and what's really interesting about that is that people with this personality tend to magnify the dangers of the quote-unquote sin if they're religious, or social order if secular. So all of a sudden, a 7-year-old holding hands when they're not supposed to in a school, if you've got an authoritarian teacher, that teacher says that's sexual harassment. Okay, Sally, Joe, to the office right now. And Sally and Joe are going, but we both agreed. It doesn't matter. You don't understand. It's sexual harassment. And so we have a zero tolerance policy at our school. And, you got 2 kids now that are being put under the, could be, they might wind up getting counseling at the school for their transgression. Whereas people who tend to be more libertarian conservatives, or even traditional liberals, will usually just let things slide. You can mention something. You could say, well, we have a rule about this or something like that. But the person who is kind of like that character in Les Miserables, or however you pronounce it, who spends years trying to track down this guy, even though now he's made a good life, and he's a good person, he's helping lots of people. You've got to punish him for that little sin that he did early on. Okay? That's the authoritarian. Now, obviously, if you grow up in either of those two extremes, you're going to take that into the culture when you go to school, and especially if it's been reinforced, where maybe entertainment has said that it is appropriate to punish those who violate the norms as you see it. Now, again, the irony is the people that speak the hardest about these things are, I think Freud would be correct in saying these are the people who are trying to repress the sin the most. They have to keep it under check, and they don't believe other people can keep it under check, so you have to have laws and regulations and control. And the other thing is that they then will feel comfortable because they know they'll be under control, that their weak super ego that is not able to keep the ego in control of the id will now be controlled by an external force. And that's why authoritarians often, they don't mind. They don't mind. Whereas you look at traditional, and I'm talking about the authoritarians of today, the new authoritarians. The old style, well, they just get power. And, they're the ones that break the rules the most afterwards. They may set some rules like thou shalt not do this, but then when they're alone, they do those things, or when, with their fellow elite. But the average new authoritarian is going to be more likely to want to be controlled themselves. Maybe they want that microchip after all. Now, the authoritarian black and white model does offer security. The rules, a way of living, thinking, and analyzing creates confusion and doubts, and never ever leads to a consensus on anything, be it political ideology, religion, or even child rearing. It's much easier to let those in authority decide. Now, that could go back to our past, where tribes had to kind of come together. And if they broke apart, humans don't live very easily in a natural setting. And I don't mean natural as in you go out to the countryside nowadays and take a hike. I mean back in the days when there was lions and tigers and bears that would eat you, or other tribes of people that would maybe eat you or do other nasty things to you. So there is an advantage to the idea that people generally will come together and agree on things. And there's nothing wrong with that in a democratic society. I mean, John Locke talked about the whole social contract and so forth. However, when we get to the point where we become hyper-vigilant and we start thinking that thinking is not a good thing, we need a thought police from 1984. Analyzing, like I said, it creates confusion. And, such a society, and a free and open society, will never, ever agree on everything. And so, why not just have no open society whatsoever? Control everything. Listen to whatever the state says. And that is alluring. There is a certain seductive kind of melody, like the sirens of Greek. I don't know if the sirens, or whether that was mythology or just lore. But the thing is that it has an appeal. That idea of let other people do the decisions. It's just like, again, I'm going to go back to that whole microchip thing. Yeah, you can make a really great argument for it. It just it just solves everything if someone else makes all of the decisions. And so social cohesion would be easier. It would be like going into the B.F. Skinner model. And Skinner was famous with the idea. You should try, pick up and read a little bit of Beyond Freedom and Dignity, because a lot of academic departments, when it comes to psychology, they really are into Skinner still, even though it's not so popular when it comes to treatment of any mental problems. It is something that's very popular in many academic centers. And the idea would be it's easier and cheaper to make people who fit into their environment than to have to reshape the environment to fit the people. Okay? Convince people that living in little tiny, this goes into like the UN Agenda 2030 thing. Convince people that it's really fantastic to live in a little apartment with only one bedroom and a little tiny bathroom, and one that's not big enough that you could really raise a family. Now, you don't have to say, well, we don't want you to raise a family, but it's still going to have the same effect. If you're in a too small of an apartment, it'd be like during the communist era in the Soviet Union. The communist government gave all kinds of awards to women who would have bigger families, but most of them in European Russia would only have one kid. And it wasn't so much that they didn't like kids. Russians love kids. But have you ever been in those apartments that they had back in those days? These things were smaller than a student dorm. And so most people, they had one kid because one kid might fit in to the apartment and everyone not be tripping over each other. And so the whole, that's kind of this authoritarian thing where you do things in the background, you do it subtly, but you're still planning someone's life. And then when you point this out to people, like, well, this is kind of manipulating people to make them do what you want them to do, and they'll say, yeah, but isn't that nicer? Isn't that nicer than forcing them by saying, thou shalt do this? You convince them, but it's every bit as authoritarian. Whether someone's got a baseball bat telling you, you shall do this or else, or whether they're, just sweetly saying, well, we've decided this is the best way, and then they use marketing and so forth to convince you of that without showing the real intentions behind it. That is, what do they call that? Velvet-gloved totalitarianism, okay? Or maybe that proverbial foot on the face that is talked about in George Orwell's 1984. Maybe it's a pair of house slippers stomping on your face. Yeah, it's so much nicer. It sounds so much easier. But it's still authoritarianism. Now, the other thing that's an appeal to authoritarians is the idea that it's easier to see who the real enemy is or the threat. Someone will tell you, nowadays, a lot of liberals are saying Russia is the threat. Oh my gosh, Russia, Russia, Russia. I mean, it's like the Russians are involved in everything, But then you say, well, Russia's not a threat, and then you start throwing out a whole bunch of reasons, and these people are like, no. It's not so much that they're necessarily rejecting your information. They're rejecting your premise, because your premise requires them to have to rethink their assumptions and force them to have to think harder than, no, the intelligence services say it, and my congressman says it. Okay, it's easier to accept it if an authority figure says it. So the authority figure can say, this is our enemy, this is what we need to do, and the authoritarian accepts it. I would actually venture to say that many of these people that, one of the segments that voted for Trump is the Tea Party people, and they often tend to be kind of a rough group when it comes to trying to get them to agree on anything. They like to argue and so forth. I would tend to think they're not the kind of people who just want someone to tell them what to do. They're more like they want to be convinced, and they'll still argue with some people that they agree with. Okay? So they're not the authoritarians. They really aren't. I would actually say the people that are the authoritarians are either sitting in an academic setting at a university, or they are at a country club, and it doesn't matter what political party they're in. They're the ones who want to control people. And there's a lot of people that think that would be great. That would be fantastic, short of maybe the microchip. But again, I'll bet you if you had a good campaign, you could convince people to line up to have their free will taken away. I really do believe that nowadays. Now, the other aspect is if you live in an authoritarian system, you get to share the guilt. Okay? If everyone's convinced that they all share the blame for something, even if they don't really have anything to do with it, then it makes the person who's weaker feel stronger, because now everyone is afflicted. It's kind of that idea that you feel strength when you go to a 12-step program. When you have maybe 30 people all with the same problem, you feel like you're stronger together because you all have a shared weakness. And this also works with guilt, that the authoritarian mind can think, oh, yes, now I don't feel so bad. I don't feel so bad because everyone that lives in my country who's hearing what's on TV or hearing what's in, at a campus or whatever, they all are part of the problem. And now we can all be part of the solution. Again, very authoritarian. Now, it also, for the authoritarian mind, it gives you a sense of superiority over those who deviate from the norms. Okay, so you got a situation, again, where if you're an authoritarian and you're looking around and you see people doing things that you don't think is right, then you start feeling like you're more enlightened. You're better than they are. Okay, it makes me think of movie stars, when they're talking and stuff. Like, they'll be wearing gowns and suits that cost more than many people will pay for their home in mortgage payments that year or something, and they're lecturing everyone else on how they should live. They fly to, and whether you agree with it or not, I'm just saying, they fly in jet planes, private jet planes, to global warming conferences and that sort of thing, because they're superior, because they've recognized that everyone else needs to come together. And so now they're trying to be part of the solution, even though that means they get to break the rules that they're already setting. So this is why many of the elite do have a sense of moral superiority over everyone else, because they will spot everything that you do, magnify it, and say that you're wrong. And it doesn't even, and the people that really accept this kind of thing, they don't have to even be elite. They could just be the person that sits there and listens to something on TV, and then they're looking around like, yeah, my family, they're jerks. They just don't know how, they don't get it. They're still out doing this, or my brother, he takes his kids camping and they have a campfire and it's putting carbon into the air when, these kinds of things. Or someone that's vegan saying that, oh my gosh, look at all those people eating meat, how horrible they are. How come they can't be as enlightened as me? Now, I don't have any problem if you're a vegan and you do it for health reasons or you just don't want to hurt animals. But there is a segment of the vegan population that does actually look down on people who have not accepted the vegan philosophy. Okay? Now, there's also this idea that there's a sense of sacrifice. So, even if one loses employment or marriage opportunities or social status or even their life, they can see it as a positive thing. And it's good that, what is it that Spock said? The good of the whole outweighs that of the individual, or the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And there's this idea then that if you may realize that let's say you're a teacher and you're really, really into population control. And you realize that if people do stop having kids in your neighborhood, that you won't have a job because there won't be any young people to teach. But you may think it's for the good. It's for the good of humanity. And therefore, you may be a very active, member of an organization that promotes the idea of lower birth rates. And so this, or you may just look at the United States when it comes to some sort of environmental regulation, and you might think, okay, I know that a lot of people are going to lose work, but we all need to make sacrifices for the future. Now, it's an ill-defined future. Most people can't say, well, the reason why we can switch from this and maybe have something else is because these benefits will come in. Usually it's just, no, it's like a religion, no, you do this because you do this. And you say, well, why? Because that's what you do. Well, what will be the effects? The effects don't matter. You do what's right. And there's no way of getting around it. There's no way that you can argue it. And I'm not putting down religion here. Now, don't get me wrong, okay? I'm religious. But the thing is that there are, I would say that there is a component that many people who are religious, and I will also include the secular people who are like social justice warriors and that sort of thing. That's a religion too. That there are tenets, and if you break those tenets, then obviously you're the bad guy, you're the sinner, and other people will look at you and say, well, no, that's bad, you shouldn't do that, and they'll get a sense of moral superiority, many of them, especially those with an authoritarian personality. Now, finally, if everyone would just obey, everyone could be good. That's a huge appeal to the authoritarian mind. because they have this idea that utopia will be everyone just with this big consensus, and that consensus will revolve around what that particular person believes is the right thing to do. Okay? Everyone who's a utopian has a dream that everyone will agree with them. Ask a person who has a utopian mindset. You'll find that's the case. They all think that everyone will kind of be a cookie-cutter version of humanity. And there's no getting around that, because it would not be utopia if you've got people arguing and disagreeing and sometimes electing the wrong person. So the idea is that is very appealing to the authoritarian is that everyone can just be good if they will just obey. If they just listen to Big Brother, everything will be fine. And you can play some nice music in the background and, make it a really nice commercial. Everyone holding hands and so forth. The thing is that we need to understand this particular mindset. Now, most of the people you will encounter out there who are saying, we need to do this or that or whatever, they're not authoritarians, but the ones who are, okay, there is an explanation for it and why they find such things as arguments and competition and discord to be uncomfortable comes back to what Freud said about the conflict between the ego, superego, and id. And ultimately, whereas this may be academic to a certain degree, it also has political ramifications, because you're seeing these movements out there where people are just trying to cut back on freedom. Even when you have Barack Obama going to a university campus and saying that we need to have people out speaking here that people may disagree with. We need to have ideas. And you've got people saying, no, we're just going to make rules that professors cannot challenge a certain norm, even if they have scientific proof for it. Students cannot challenge it. This is just going to be the new orthodoxy. Hey, this goes beyond even what the Soviet Union was like. So you better understand it. And that's the way you'll be able to confront it. Otherwise, it's going to be very frustrating, and you're not going to make any progress.